I don't think Kristi Noem should have had any business being anywhere near the job that she was given by this administration. She is not
Fair.
competent to be DHS secretary, and her deputy, Corey Lewandowski. The strategy that they have pursued in cities like Minneapolis has been a huge and disastrous misfire.
There's this like big trust drop with the GOP in Minnesota. There's a new Economist YouGov poll that's showing Republican trust in ICE dropped from 68% to 60% in just 2 weeks.
Mhm.
So that's a real shift. This isn't just noise. These aren't activists. These are actual real Republican voters reacting in real time to what they're seeing in the news, on social media. And, there's been a leadership shakeup. This is signaling panic. What do you guys think is happening? Because Stephen Miller came out with a statement last night, uh, almost admitting some fault, saying that ICE and Border Patrol are not following protocol up there. And Kristi Noem, through a surrogate on Axios, is kind of pointing the finger back at him, saying, well, I'm just following his orders. And he's pointing the finger at her. It's like the Spider-Man meme where everyone's just like pointing fingers at each other. And Bovino's out. He's
Yeah.
coming back to California to retire. So, what do we do here? Ben,
Yeah.
this trust, 8 points in 2 weeks. This
Yeah.
isn't Democrats. These are real voters. What are they reacting to?
I think there's a couple different things here. Number one, anytime you have someone lose their life and it's caught on tape, you're going to have a number. If it's a question of, do you like seeing this or not, it's going to drop. I think that's basically the poll question here is, do you like seeing the loss of life and witnessing it, whether it's the lady that used a 2-ton car to try to run over an ICE agent, but she lost her life, or the shooting we saw a couple of days ago? That is something the majority of Americans, if asked the question, do you think this is the right thing, they're not automatically going to say no. Now, with that being said, I do think the president was smart here to have a little bit of a change in leadership and a reset. I think there's also a lot of accountability here. And if you want to point the finger of blame, you have a governor that has said he wanted a civil war, that we have a civil war. You have a mayor that has said to ICE agents, get the F out. And so there has to be accountability there as well, because there's literally a couple hundred other cities in America where this is not happening. One reason and one reason only why. And many of them are Democratic-led cities. They work with ICE agents. They don't go to war with them. They don't tell them to get the F out of their city, and they don't say, let's have a civil war. I think a third part of the story is you have these professional agitators, and we're starting to witness even more of that. They are paid, they're well organized, they're out there, they're stalking these ICE agents. That is not healthy for that environment. And so I do think seeing the number drop, the White House, again, leadership's important here. Having faith in those in law enforcement is very important. You don't want to lose that PR war. But at the end of the day, if you ask in the same poll, do you support the president going after rapists and murderers? That number is still going to be very high. Those that are selling drugs, that number is going to be very high. And unfortunately, this has become a sideshow that's now the main show here. And I don't think the president should lose the willpower to continue to go after those. Tricia McLaughlin, for example, made it very clear yesterday at DHS that they're not going to stop, but having Tom Homan go there and having a reset, the president speaking with the governor, having a reset, I think that's good for everyone. And again, I do think the governor realizes that he can lose two on this one. How many people do you want shot in real life? I would assume the number would be zero. I hope he also steps up and says, hey, we got to do a better job working with ICE. When there's violent criminals we have in our possession, we need to hand them over.
Christine, when you see someone like Stephen Miller actually publicly acknowledging protocol violations and like leadership scrambling, is this a signal of like an institutional failure, or do you think it's just bad optics?
Well, I don't think Kristi Noem should have had any business being anywhere near the job that she was given by this administration. She is not
Fair.
competent to be DHS secretary, and her deputy, Corey Lewandowski. The strategy that they have pursued in cities like Minneapolis has been a huge and disastrous misfire. And I agree with Ben about the fact that you've got you've got a lot of wrong going on here. What the governor of Minneapolis and the mayor of Minneapolis, governor of Minnesota, mayor of Minneapolis are doing is absolutely despicable. They are when they're talking to their activist base, they're saying things like, F ICE and go get them, and then when they turn to the media, they're like, well, this is just terrible. This is proto-fascism that they're asking us to work with these masked thugs who are Border Patrol and ICE. No one is asking them to do the job of Border Patrol or ICE. What they are asking them to do is what has been pointed out in a lot of other jurisdictions is done, which is acknowledge the detainer papers that are filed by ICE when someone is in police custody for having been arraigned for a crime, turning them over to ICE for deportation. And that's happening smoothly in lots of venues. It's not happening in Minneapolis, but there is a huge amount of responsibility here on the part of the Trump administration. And the Stephen Miller Kristi Noem Bovino approach is to revel in the chaos, if you will.
Yeah.
It's to sort of say, we're bringing the fight right to your streets. We're going to get these bad guys, and we don't really have to abide by the rules or care about the optics. And that's kind of how they rolled into Minneapolis. And it hasn't worked. The American people want the border secure. And that is a huge victory that the Trump administration has achieved. They've done that. They did this thing.
In less than a year.
Yes, in less than a year. And they did it, by the way, without changing any laws. They proved the lie of the Biden administration. All they had to do was enforce existing laws. That is a huge victory. It's what voters wanted. The reason it's curdling, I think, is there is an optics problem, but there's also a tactics problem here.
Yeah.
And I'm really reassured to see Homans, who's kind of the adult in the room, being brought in. He is the only official who was cautious in the wake of the first shooting in Minneapolis. He said, you know what? We need an investigation. We need to see what happened. We need to figure this all out. That is exactly what you want leaders to do in those moments. And neither the leaders on the left in the form of, Waltz or Fry, or unfortunately, people like Kristi Noem, who lied to the public's face and said things that were untrue both times. So that is, I think she should go. That's not obviously my decision to make, but she's completely bungled this. And look, that's on Trump. He chose her.
Speaking to the tactics, and how can we fix this situation with ICE? Because I know it's not a monolith. There are many qualified and very good agents. There's National Guards, there's former police, there's active police, there's very qualified agents who are doing a good job, who are good people who are actively doing this. And then there are people who are there for, let's be honest, the wrong reasons, people who maybe didn't pass the physical test or the background tests, and they're doing this because they want to go and be nasty in the streets. So how can we fix this? Because their claims are, and we're going to get to this, I don't know if you've seen this Ecuador consulate video, but they kind of, in some of these cases, roll up to places without identification. They're in plain clothes. They've got masks on, and it almost looks like people are going to be robbed or kidnapped, attacked. They don't have a uniform. It doesn't look official. So how can they get their message cohesive in a way that is or I don't want to say comforting, because no one's comforted when they're getting, swarmed by, agents. But how can we get this messaging on point?
Look, I think I'll push back a little bit, only because my dad's in law enforcement, and
Sure.
so there's two aspects of this. Like,
well, I have a cousin who's on call to be a NICE agent, so it's like, I have family invested in this too, and I don't want him being called a racist or a Gestapo. He's not. He's a lovely man.
Yeah, I think there's two things to this. One, let's talk about like local police. They have fugitive squads. They do the same thing 99% of the time. I've been out with the fugitive squad to do ride-alongs in my hometown of Memphis. Like, they're not dressed like a police officer, because there's one, surprise, and that's part of it. Two, their own safety, and three, usually they're going after, as the president would refer to it, bad hombres. And so you have to have some of that. Well, then when you have the left that's doxing, stalking, and putting out, apps where they're telling you in these signal chats of where they are and to go after and attack them and follow them and cut them off in the street, which led to one of the deaths that we've talked about earlier. It makes it even, you have to consider yourself even more. If you're driving around with a car that has ice on the side, remember, they were being attacked and those cars were had rocks thrown at them. They'd been shot at. So they took ice off the side of the car. Why? Because it was a target, and someone was going to die in uniform. So I go back to the leadership here in Minnesota. if you want transparency and you don't want it to look like it's secret, then for the love of all things that are good, stop demonizing and referring to them as the Gestapo, and stop having people you work with in your administration that are working with these groups that are then doxing them and sending text messages of what hotels they're staying at, for goodness sakes, and surrounding those hotels and slashing the tires of the cars. Like, that is actually happening day to day. And so I go back to this. There are hundreds of cities in this country where none of this is happening. I live in Houston, for example, now. It's a liberal mayor, a liberal city council, and they're not doing this. You look at places like Dallas and San Antonio. I go back to Texas because that's where I am. It's run by liberals, like very liberal people are running those cities in the proper. None of this is happening because they understand that if you have an ICE detainer and you have someone in custody that is charged with one of these crimes, you communicate with ICE. I mean, go back to just yesterday. They had someone that was wanted for child rape that they did not work with to release to ICE in Minneapolis. So what do? You have a throwdown basically as they're trying to find the guy, and you put everyone's life at risk by doing that. So you could fix this problem instantly if the mayor and the governor came out and said, violent criminals, we're going to do like every other city in America that is sane, and we're going to stop all this. Well, then you're not going to have all these issues in the streets because it's done in an orderly way inside of a jail or a courthouse. That is how this is happening all over the country. But they wanted this war. The Democrats, by the way, wanted this war. They're funding it. The biggest fundraisers of the Democratic Party are funding the protests. They want this war so badly that they want to shut down the government right now. And I believe they will. I'll make that prediction. I think every Democrat on Capitol Hill, they're going to shut down the government. They believe politically that if people are dying and it's their side that's getting shot, right? The Democrats, that is a sacrifice they're willing to make for the political gain and to shut down the government. That's beyond me. I think that's un-American. I think that's really sick and sad. But don't encourage people to go out there and start a civil war. And notice when the governor says it and the mayor says it, they're not willing to go out there and risk their lives. They're finding minions to do it on their behalf. I think that's even worse.